and then I can I can start.
Okay. Let's see. So the meeting is being recorded, everyone. I want to thank everyone for joining us. Thank you, Tahereh. Thank you, Michelle and Evan. And thank you, everyone, for coming through. Good Friday. With that said, I guess we can get started. We've been having these land discussions every Friday. Sort of been inspired about the whole turn of events that we're dealing with right now. A lot of people are interested in, like, how can we work with the land? How can we grow food? How can we, provide ourselves housing and just, be prepared for anything. And, obviously we want to help our communities too. So we've been having discussions around, what it takes to own property, what it takes to maintain land, and how do we do things in a non-colonial fashion, right? We're not here necessarily trying to make profit or anything like that. We're here trying to do our best to be good guests and good relatives to the indigenous people whose land we're on. I'm in Sabangna, which is Tongva territory. Just want to pay my respects to the ancestors here whose land I'm on. Me and Teresa helped with starting this collective to do a lot of native plant work, but also help amplify the voices of the indigenous people whose land we're on, working collaboratively with indigenous people, and kind of seeing how we can help our communities all around, whether it's youth, people experiencing homelessness, everyone. So with that said, we've been learning a lot. We've been sharing a lot of information and sharing a lot of knowledge and time with each other. So yeah. Do you have anything you want to share, Teresa?
No, just thank you all for joining us, and I'm really looking forward to this talk. I'm learning a lot. I'm sure I will be learning a lot about vermicomposting and raising quails. So really excited. Thank you, Tahereh. Thank you, Michelle and Evan, for being here. And thank you, everyone, for joining us.
And you can take it away, Tahereh.
Okay, well, hi, everyone. I'm Tahereh Shirazi. I am a school garden educator, or was until, I think, yesterday, when we were officially and formally told that our program won't be operating till next year, which is school garden programs in about 100 LAUSD schools, since most of it is going to be online school from August onwards. So it's kind of sad, but it's also, it is what it is. Things change in life, and I've done this for 5 years, and it's time to move on, I suppose. Having said that, I also am a gardener, and I've been a gardener all my life pretty much. I've learned most of it by doing, in fact, all of it by doing. And of course, then studying it a little bit more formally, not in a college or university, but just many, many courses and lots of books. So Teresa and Joe wanted me to talk about, last week I talked about composting, backyard composting, also called hot composting, by using yard waste. But not everyone has a yard, and not everyone has access to so much of yard waste, which is leaves and grass and so on. So for many of us who live in smaller places, and basically all we have access to is food scraps, the better way to compost and be efficient and not waste and put stuff into landfill is vermicomposting. And vermicomposting is really being able to, also called vermiculture, creating a culture of feeding worms with food scraps, and creating an environment where they produce, where their castings or their poop is nutrient-rich food, which we use for our plants. It can be done at home, inside an apartment, in the balcony of your apartment. It can be done in your backyard. It can be in any place where the temperature is between 55 and about 85 degrees Fahrenheit. There's worms and there's worms and there's worms. There's all kinds of worms in this world, but the particular ones that we use for vermicomposting are called red wriggler worms. Their scientific name is Icenia fetida. They kind of have a fetid smell sometimes, but that's not the reason. And they do this work with all their body parts, and I kind of listed all these parts on this PowerPoint, just for the heck of it, in case you're interested in all the parts of the worm's body. it does not have teeth, so its intestines and kind of sort of contract and expand and rub and decompose everything. And they're prolific reproducers, and all they do is eat and poop and reproduce. So, like I mentioned, a mature worm can give birth to 100 worms in a year, and can tolerate a wide range of temperatures. They can also eat up half their body weight in food scraps every day. So, and then they live to be 1 year old. Their lifespan is 1 year. This is a little diagram of the anatomy of a worm in case you're interested in that anatomy, the various parts of it. What most kids, I mean, I talk kids because I've been teaching kids for so long, get very excited about is that they have 5 hearts, which is pretty unusual. I think what this diagram is missing is that they have both male and female reproductive organs in one worm, but you do need another worm to be able to reproduce, which also has a male and female reproductive organ in it. What you need to get started for a vermicompost system is a pound of regular worms, and 1 pound is quite a bit of regular worms. Like, it's a lot actually, but in any case, it's worth about $25 at the very most, and you can get it in bait shops. Bait shops won't sell you a pound worth because they use little small amounts of it for fishing, so you'll be able to buy a whole lot less, and that's fine too, because you can start with maybe half a pound or a quarter of a pound. And then you can buy it online. If you Google it, you'll find it, and some specialty stores will sell it. And of course, if you know anybody who's making vermicompost and selling it, they too sometimes will sell it to you. The County of Los Angeles has free gardening classes called smartgardening.org. And now with COVID, they're doing this online once a month. So they too sell the worms along with a vermicomposting bin. You can buy it from them as well. So 1 pound of regular worms pretty much eat up 3.5 pounds worth of food scraps every week. That's a lot of food scraps. And so you need the worms, you need the bedding in which they're going to live their lives and eat and digest and poop and reproduce. And that bedding is carbon material, dry brown carbon material. That carbon material is necessary for the process of decomposition, for the microbes that do the decomposing, as well as for the worms themselves. So they also act as a filter to soak up excess moisture, as well as filter odors. It's the odors that bring the bugs and the critters and all the nosy people, because the smells are so pungent. Of course, you don't like the smells either yourself. So the bedding can be newspaper cut into 1-inch strips, without no glossy paper, no shiny paper, no colored paper, because all of that has a lot of toxic chemicals in it, and you don't want to add that to your compost. You can also use egg cartons, cardboard egg cartons, shred them up really small. You can use corrugated cardboard, shred that up really small. You can also use the insides of toilet paper and paper towel rolls. You just kind of open it up and make it into the string that it becomes. And the more fancy stuff is coconut coir or peat moss, and both of which are really wonderful sources of bedding because they're soft and lovely, but they get flown in from Sri Lanka or wherever lots of coconut grows. So there's a huge carbon impact. So you can buy that too, but I kind of list that as the last thing that you want to use. If you were using coconut coir, it comes in blocks like bricks, and you just kind of soak it in water, in a bucket of water, and it softens up, and then it becomes all this like wool, like soft brown wool, and you use that as bedding. Let's see. So then that's all the things that you need to fill your bin with. And then what you need is the bin itself. And the bin can be a store-bought bin, which comes in, which is plastic, and it has the lid has holes in it for air to circulate. There's sort of a mesh at the bottom for air to circulate. It comes in stacks of 2 or 3, but you can also make it yourself. And there are a lot of DIY instructions on YouTube. You can watch those and make yourself one with plastic bins that you might have lying around, essentially stacking one bin into another. with both the top and the bottom bins to have holes in them, holes for air and holes for moisture to drain through. And of course, a lid on the top bin so that your regular worms don't run away and other creatures don't come in and your bin doesn't get too dry. So your bedding should be which is your shredded paper, shredded carbon essentially, should be 2 times the volume of your bin. And you'll need a spritz bottle of water, or then just a bucket of water, because you're going to be adding that as you go along. You also, of course, need worm food, which is essentially fruit and vegetable scraps from your kitchen. That includes coffee grounds. It includes tea bags. I and most people who vermicompost remove the staples from tea bags because those are nasty things that are going to shred your worms. And eggshells that have been, I generally wash them and then I crush them. You crush them as small as you can. And or little rock dust. The eggshells and the rock dust essentially work as that grit that the worm needs to digest the food, but also oh my gosh, the word leaves me, but to balance the pH of your worm bin, because you don't want it to be too acidic, and eggshells are more alkaline. And so it kind of balances off if there is too much acidity, eggshells will balance that off. Then some people, where did I go? Some people add a little bit of finished compost in it to begin with, or they add a little bit of soil to begin with, because compost, a teaspoon of compost has so many thousands of microorganisms in it already. And so it kind of jump starts the decomposition process. I personally, when I started my bin, I never used any soil or any compost. I just started with the bedding and the food scraps and moistened it, and then that was it. And if you don't like a smelly bin, then don't add smelly vegetables. Onions and broccoli and cabbage and the broccoli cabbage family in general smell. And so just don't add that just dump that into your other compost bin. And so then here's an illustration of what these bins look like. This is the one to the right, to my right in any case, is the DIY version with all these holes drilled everywhere for air circulation, including on the lid. And here's a stacking version that you can buy. You can also buy it from the county if you went on that website. And I'll just keep quiet for a second so you can look at this picture. It's called a flow-through system. Joe and Teresa, if I'm talking too fast, just tell me to slow down. Am I going too fast?
No, I think you're going good. But
Okay.
if folks want to have any questions, feel free to type in.
I will actually slow down right about now. And if you have any questions about a bin and what goes into it, ask me now, and then we'll keep going. And if no one has a question, then that's great.
All right, we'll wait a little bit.
Yeah, we'll wait. Where is it?
Is this something that you would want to put in the house or outside?
You can put it even under your bed if it's not so high. Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
And you can put it it needs to be in a cool-ish kind of place between 55 and 80 degrees Fahrenheit, as I mentioned at the beginning.
Yeah.
To be too hot, you don't want it to be too freezing cold either.
Okay.
But it needs a darkish, cool environment. And yeah, it can be inside, it can be outside, it can be anywhere. A lot of people make benches, like if they have a balcony, then they make a wooden bench on which they sit. But when you lift the lid, it's got vermicomposting happening inside. That too can be Googled, and you can make one of those as well. That's really cool. But by the time you make yourself a bench, it'll be a while. So I think first experiment with these simple methods before you make a whole bench full of it, if you would like to. Should I go on?
It seems like.
Okay, so here's a DIY bin photograph. All it is they've shred up all that newspaper. Nice thin strips, by the way, otherwise they all just clump up. and you use the spritz to moisten it. And if it gets too wet, then you just take the whole bunch and squeeze it out, let the water drain, and then spread it again. And then make sure that your food scraps are, oops, phones. Make sure that your food scraps are small, because obviously if you put big, gigantic chunks of food, it's hard for those little worms to eat that. And so the smaller, the faster, the easier it is for decomposition to happen. And then you've layered it with your bedding, and then you've added your food scraps that have been cut small, and then you've added your more bedding on top. So the bedding that's at the bottom is always slightly, is damp, but that's about 90% of your bedding goes at the bottom. And here's the next bin, next slide I'll show you. So make sure that everything is not too wet. If it is, then you just add more dry, dry bedding. You can, or you can put less food in it, because food also exudes moisture. If it's too dry, everything that you spritz it and add more food scraps. This is the bin conditions. I should have put the slide at the end, but I've put it somewhere over here. What I think I missed saying here was that about 90% of your bedding should be laid out, and then you put a plate on top of it. And if this plate doesn't sink down, then you're good to go. But if the plate sinks, then you add more bedding to it. The plate should just be able to sit. And then that's most of your bedding. Then you throw your food scraps, and then you cover it with dry bedding, completely dry bedding, because that dry bedding will soak in the moisture from your food scraps, and it will fix the moisture levels of your bin. And so the bin conditions, and this is some basic stuff about not being too dry, not being too wet. Always like a squeezed out sponge is what the feel of your bin should be. The contents of your bin should be. And you keep feeding the worms till you basically don't recognize either the food scraps that you threw in there nor the bedding, because over time they're gonna eat that bedding up as well and poop it all out. So just lift the bedding and always feed under the bedding, and then cover up your food smells with dry bedding. That dry bedding will keep the odors as well. So, and then in about 2 months or so, that's when you hit the jackpot. So when is it time to harvest? That's usually the question. You keep doing this, you keep adding and adding, and you're not sure when in the world is this thing ready. And basically when a dark, sort of a rich layer that smells nice and earthy carpets the bottom of your bin, then that's your worm castings or vermicompost or worm poop, essentially. You just simply scoop this out, and you'll get some worms in your hand as well. But there are a couple of ways to separate the worms from this casting, and then you spread it in your vegetables or your fruit or your flowers, anything, any bed. So there are about 2 simple methods to follow. One is the slow migration method, which is you remove the bedding layer and any uneaten food from your bin. After about 2 months or so, you should sort of move it around and see if there's this dark layer at the bottom. If you see that, then any food scraps that you still recognize and any bedding that you still recognize, take it out and just simply take it out and keep it to the side. Then with a small hand rake, you kind of pull out this dark material and push it to one side of your bin. And when you do that, fluff it up either with your fingers or with this rake, so that air circulates in it and it begins to dry out. Don't cover it anymore with bedding or with food or with anything. Just move it to the side so that half your bin now looks like so. Half your bin is empty and half your bin, everything is being moved to one side. So like here, is my pointer in the right place? Yeah.
Yeah.
So then in this empty side, you put more bedding and you put more food. And this thing you don't cover. Let's go back to the slow migration method. So then you dunk the bedding and the food set aside, which you had taken out initially, into the empty side of the bin. And in fact, if it's too wet, add more dry bedding. If it's too dry, make it more wet, spritz it and make it more wet. But in any case, you're starting with a new set of bedding and adding more food scraps to this empty side. And then you keep feeding that new side that you just started. Just keep feeding it with more just food. And what's going to happen is this side, all the worms are simply going to find the food and come here. They're all just simply move out because they're always looking for food. And they are top feeders. And they're not going to bury themselves too far down. So they'll just simply move here and start eating. Over time, it's a slow migration. So maybe in a month, I think, about a month or so, you'll see that this stuff has no more worms in it. And you'll know every time you open your bin to feed this side, you will see this side get drier and drier and less activity, less movement in there. And so then you'll know that there are no more worms in here. So that's the pile, and then you pick up and then you use it. So now always keep fluffing that vermicompost, because the fluffing will slowly dry it out. You don't want it to be all wet when you put it into your plants either. You want it to be kind of dry. And then the other way of doing it, let me go to the image first, is this one. This is like making little mountains and shining a light on this mountain. And when you shine the light, those worms are going to go right to the bottom. They don't like light, which is why they're in a bin, which is why they're closed, which is why they like dark spaces, because they like to kind of hide in there. So what you do with this mountains out of molehills method is that you remove the bedding layer and the uneaten food and you set it aside. And then you scoop out everything, all that vermicompost, and any worms that are in it, don't worry about that, and lay them into these piles on a piece of tarp. And don't do this on a hot, sunny, miserable day. Do it in a sort of a nice climate, or do it in some part of your yard or some part of your house where there is relative shade. It's not pelting sun. So then once you've made these piles, these mountains, then you put the bedding back into your bin which was empty, and you put the uneaten food as well, and then you put fresh bedding into it, and then you just make sure that it's nice and moist, and you cover it and close it. The process will start again. In the meanwhile, these guys, you shine this light on it, on the center of this pile, and you wait for 15 minutes. And after 15 minutes, you just brush where is this? The top, like this top portion, you just brush it aside. And as you and lift it and put it into a bucket. And then again, you shine the light, and 15 minutes later, you brush the next layer off and you put that into a bucket. And little by little, these molehills will flatten up, like looking like pancakes, or like a little clump of just the worms. Because every time you lift off some of that crummy stuff on top, these guys are going to go down and down and down and down and down and down. So they'll be right at the bottom, and you just harvesting the top. You got a whole bucket full of it now. And in that bucket, you'll still have a few worms. Don't worry so much about it. You can leave it and dunk it in your garden. That's all right. It's not the end of the world. Or if you're very particular, then you can kind of pull them out one by one and add them back into that bin. So the last bit, which will look like so, a whole pile of worms at the bottom, you take all of these guys back and put them into the vermicomposting bin in that new bed and the more food scraps that you've added to it.
Someone asked,
yeah.
Adriana, she asked if, how often do you add food scraps?
Some people are pretty anal about it. They have a whole schedule. They make a chart, and then every 2 days they'll open it, close it, and see if they can recognize anything. If they can't recognize the look of it, then they add, depending on how many worms you have and how big your system is. You can do this. Don't put too much food into your system, but that doesn't mean don't put too little either. So I would say every few days, open the lid and see what you see. If you see that your food scraps that you threw in, most of it has been eaten up and become, unrecognizable, then add more food scraps. But if you are still seeing big chunks of this, that, and the other, then don't keep adding more, because it's going to make it more and more moist. And when it does that, there'll be a lot of odors. It'll become anaerobic. It'll bring fleas and mites and flies and all kinds of critters, curious critters as well. So don't overfeed it. Don't make it so wet. Wetness will come from overfeeding. So it's up to you. You can feed it every 2 or 3 days, or you can once a week, or maybe once a month. Or you can go once a month and dunk a whole lot of food on them and then forget about them for a month and come back and see. And to do that, obviously you're producing food waste every day, right? You're not eating once a month, and you're also not eating once every 2 or 3 days. So people just store their food scraps in Ziploc bags and freeze them. And then when it's time to feed, they take this out of the freezer, they let it thaw, and then they throw away all the moisture that comes out from thawing, because then otherwise it's too wet in that bin of yours. And then they put it into the bin. So if you have a big freezer, I don't. So I don't do this. I put some of my food scraps into my one bin because I only have one stacking system. I mean, 1 or 2. and the rest I keep putting into my regular compost. Does that answer your question, Michelle?
Awesome.
Okay, so
that's from Adriana.
Oh, sorry, Adriana. Well, and then last but not least is there might be flies. Flies are annoying. That's all it is. They're not going to do anything to your bin. But when you open the lid and there's all these flies all over the place, these are the 2 types of traps that people make, and then they stick it on the corner of their bin. And what happens with these traps are that the flies kind of fall into it and drown. And so you have no flies in your bin. Sometimes you get too many ants in your bin. Maybe your bin is too dry, and that could be a reason. People sort of elevate the bin and they take some, old cans and put oil in it, and then on all 4 corners of your bin. And then the ants come into that first, and then they fall right into the oil and drown as well. So, or then you just, if it's too wet, or if there's too many flies and fleas and mites and ants and whatnot, you just open your bin for a bit and let it dry out, let it air out, and let these guys leave. Some people get maggots in their bin. And the maggots happen because they are flies, essentially, that become maggots. So maggots are not necessarily bad because they don't eat the worms. They're not going to kill your worms. In fact, they eat other nasty bugs. So in a way, they're good for that bin, but they just don't look good in there. So it instantly tells you that your bin is too wet. And if your bin is too wet, then add more bedding, in other words, paper. And most problems are from too wet, and slow down feeding your bin because you're adding too much food too fast. Any other questions that anybody might have? I think I've pretty much covered it all.
Not to kind of go on another whole topic, but I've seen some growing beds with like a lot of ants and all that. Could you use like similar techniques in terms of?
Yeah. Like in terms of putting some kind of a oil
Trap.
Oil traps. And I can never pronounce it. Diatomaceous? No, I can't say it. Earth. It's this powder that you get that kills ants too if you sprinkle it around.
Is it was it like grind up shells? Is that the powder?
Yeah, kind of looks like that. Yes, ground up shells. It's like this whitish powder.
Diatomaceous earth or something like that.
Diatomaceous earth.
The ants are a nuisance, but they're not necessarily bad. They are decomposers as well. People hate ants, people hate bees, people hate flies. Your compost, the vermicompost pile will have critters in it. Not critters, but little mites and springtails and centipedes and millipedes and all these other little microorganisms, and they're fine to be in there because they are all decomposers and they're all eating each other or something. They're not really messing with your worms. Your worms will be messed with if you forgot and you left your lid open, and they might all just run away. Or your worms may dry out. You forgot the lid open forever and the whole pile got dried out and that's it. Everybody got killed as well. Because worms, the surface of the skin, like a snake or any other, invertebrate, needs to be wet for it to do its business and to live its life, essentially. So if it dries out, it kind of like dries out. So it never wants a totally dry condition. It always needs moisture. So any other way of killing them? I don't know. Don't make sure that the lid is closed so that your cat or dog or whoever doesn't go into it. You don't want cats and dogs in there. And you also, if you don't want the maggots and you don't want the flies, besides putting these funnel fly traps and bottle fly traps, make sure that all those holes that you drilled into either your DIY system or even this other, store-bought system, make sure that the holes are not too big. And if they are, then put some kind of a screen or a mesh in front of the, inside, so that flies don't come through. Flies can come through the smallest spaces. And then once they live in this wonderful, pile of food scraps, bacteria, fungus, all that good stuff, then they're gonna become maggots. And then you don't want the maggots there. And again, like I said, maggots not a bad thing in and of themselves.
Adriana asked again if are there any critters that are bad for the bin or worms? Are there any like other critters?
You mean like a real four-legged, like a rodent or a cat or a dog? Yes, you don't want any of those guys in there because they're going to start pooping in there and their poop is toxic, very, very strong.
Mm-hmm.
No, you don't want them there.
Mm.
Yeah.
Or other bugs.
Other bugs are okay, but other four-legged creatures are not okay. And cats and dogs are definitely not okay.
Okay. Awesome. I was noticing too, like, in terms of like the size, how we're talking about like a bin. Is vermicomposting like really good? Like if you're gonna do like a large scale kind of like garden or.
Yeah. When it's a large scale garden, people usually make a large scale wooden bin with all these holes in it. These systems that I'm talking to you about are much, much smaller, like a little plastic storage bin, 2 feet by something, like maybe 2 feet long or maximum 3 feet long, one stacked into the other. But on a large scale, like an urban farm that you might be growing food in, you need a much bigger system. So you can construct your own with wood that you have left over. Just make sure that your wood is not treated and it doesn't have poisonous treatment on it. And then it has a lid, and the lid has holes in it and the sides have holes in it, and it can be sitting right on soil.
Is the migration like a little slower, or is it like pretty much like the same?
It's pretty much the same.
Oh, that's cool.
And these guys are just looking for food.
Yeah.
The minute you throw the food in there, they'll come up and they'll start eating and eating and eating and reproducing. And you'll see these little white things in there. Those are their babies. Don't get frightened if you see a bunch of those white little things. Those are the little teeny tiny worms.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And I mean, if you are on a urban farm, I think every urban farmer has them. I don't know. I'm assuming this, but I have seen them on some small backyard farms here in Pasadena on the east side of Los Angeles in any case. And they work really well and they produce some fabulous vermicompost. At Lincoln Heights, there's a church of the Epiphany, and they have a garden, a really nice garden, and they used to do a lot of vermicomposting there. They had this big, long wooden, like a trunk, literally, in which they made their vermicompost. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, if there's any other questions,
yeah, I'm here.
Feel free to take this time, folks. If you have any questions, type them in, or just go ahead and unmute yourself.
I should stop sharing my screen, I guess. Let's see. How do I do this? Share new screen. No, I don't want to share any screen. How do you get rid of this, Joe?
Go on the. It should be on the bottom, maybe. Like,
Mm-hmm.
oh no, actually on the top. Go on the top.
Pause share. Is that what it is?
All the way on the top. The menu should drop down. Scroll all the way on the top.
Hang on. Maybe I should just close my everything and then open this guy.
Is it at the bottom?
Let's see. Or maybe I can. Maybe I can.
Maybe you can get rid of it.
Take it away from you. All right. There you go.
I'm just learning this Zoom business, so.
Cool. All right. Thank you, Tahereh. That was dope. I never tried this. Sometimes I would get when we had a compost system. Me and Clem used to be part of the Green Seeds Club at Pasadena City College, and we would get a lot of those. What are they? Grubs. They're like white. They would turn into like those green beetles that everyone's so terrified of.
June beetles, right?
Yeah. So there were a lot in there, and then our professor, one of our professors, we would give them to her, and she would feed them to her chickens.
Right. Yeah. Chickens love that stuff. The chickens will like the maggots as well. So obviously your bin was too wet. That's basically it. You put too much food scraps into that and not enough bedding. So literally, 2/3 of your bin should be bedding. And then the rest is the food.
Yeah, it was literally just a pile on the floor, like on the grass floor.
And the top layer of your pile, whether it's in a big old bin or a small system, should add dry shredded newspaper. Always dry, because dry will just start absorbing all the moisture really quickly. Yeah, don't add more wet stuff on top. Wet paper on top. It's like redundant to do that.
Would you be able to add wood chips or no?
Yes, you could add not big chunks of wood chips, but like fine, really fine wood chips. Yes, you could use that. You can also, people use dry leaves for bedding. Sort of crushed small, leaf debris, not pokey and big and bulky, but sort of finely crushed dry leaves. Yes, you can use that too.
Cool. Thank you for sharing that. All right, well, we can turn it over to our next sort of half of this discussion. Michelle and Evan have a presentation about quail raising and sort of the benefits when it comes to like land stewardship. So if you guys are ready, go ahead and take it away. And if you need help too with like the screen share and all that, just let me know. Oh, they're muted right now. You guys are muted. There you go.
Sorry about that. Hi, everybody. I just wanted to let you guys know that we have uploaded a Microsoft Doc to the group chat. So if you scroll all the way up, you can either download that, and if you don't have Microsoft Word, then you can also follow the link right under that, and that is a shared Google Doc. Let me know if it's too dark in here. We're trying to work with our lighting where it's kind of not so great. But anyways, once everybody opens that up, then we will go ahead and get started. So we're going to be talking today about raising Coturnix quail. And we're just going to go over like a lot of the key points to get started. And if you guys have any questions, feel free to ask in the chat or ask us after our discussion. So we broke this into a few parts. The first part is setup. So you can do many types of setup for Coturnix quails. The most common types of setups are
either a rabbit cage with a wire bottom. Those are pretty easy. It allows the feces from the quails to fall under the cage, and you can put a catch. So if you want to save that for manure, that's a really easy way to do it. But also, you can set them up in a chicken run or aviary. So personally, I like the aviary style, or something that you could go inside of, because it trains your quails not to be afraid of your presence, and to also be able to go in there and bond with them while you're cleaning their coop. So chicken runs, let's see. If you do a chicken run, you tend to want it to be 3 feet or less. Oh, thank you. The reason for this is because quails have a defense mechanism of popping straight up in the air to try to get away from predators. So if you have something that's the wrong height, it could harm your quail. They could break their neck, they can hit their head, which would cause severe injury and death. And if you have an aviary, obviously you want it higher than 8 feet. You want it about 6 or 8 feet tall, something high enough to where when they do pop up, they're still not going to hit themselves. Inside of their setup, you want to provide lots of places for them to hide. Naturally, they like to hide in bushes and under branches out in the wild. So you definitely want to create a really natural environment for them inside their coop as well. Let's see. So can they be free ranged? So unfortunately, as with the Coturnix quail, which is the most commonly raised quail, like backyard quail, they could fly. So it's not recommended that you let them free range in your yard. If they're fully grown, kind of like a hen or a chicken, they're pretty heavy, so they can't fly very high, but they could still scale the average height of a fence. So you definitely don't want that, because they can fly over your fence, and they could fly into your neighbor's yard. There could be predators, or there could be a road in the back. They could get hit by a car. So it's just really bad. So you definitely don't want them to be free range. You definitely want them to be in a safe, enclosed environment. So something that I've seen people do to give their quails a little bit more freedom is making a tunnel, like an enclosed tunnel made out of chicken wire that goes around their garden. So what people will do is, like, they'll put their quails or chickens in these runs that kind of like zigzag around their garden, to let them hang out and peck through the mulch and pick at weeds and all kinds of scraps in your garden for them to eat. But you definitely want whatever kind of enclosure you have them in to be super predator proof. So unfortunately, predators know that quails are pretty tasty. It attracts a lot of predators. So this brings me to my next section. And let me know if I'm going too fast. But yeah, so if the quail happen to slip away into your yard, they can be killed by birds of prey, your dogs, or your cats. Even if you have the most docile dog or cat in the world, I guarantee you they will definitely still try to kill your quails and eat them. Our tiny, tiny dog has successfully snatched one of our quails and unfortunately killed it. So yes, you definitely need to have a super safe environment, like really good latches. If you do the chicken run versus the rabbit coop, then you definitely want to border the chicken run with chicken wire so predators can't dig underneath. Rodents really like quills, so it'll attract things like skunks. We recently discovered we had possums in our yard. Possums were trying to hang out and get them. It'll attract other things, coyotes, anything you name it. Everybody's trying to get at your quail. So really important. Always predator proof your setups. So it's pretty easy to incubate eggs. There's a few ways to get your quail. You can also, obviously buy them from somebody local who already has chicks that are hatched. Or you can order eggs online or order eggs locally or get eggs from a friend. If you do get eggs, you're going to want to get an incubator from a feed store. You can rent them, or you can also buy one on Amazon. So for the first 14 days of the egg incubation, you want the temperature to be between 43 and 55 degrees. On the 7th day, so it's a pretty fast process. On the 7th day, you'll be able to candle your eggs. So candling is a process where you get a really bright LED light. You can buy a candling light on Amazon, or you can use your cell phone if you have an iPhone. They have these super amazing built-in LED light flashlights. And this, as you can see, it's like shining really brightly through my finger. This will work effectively for your eggs. So what candling is when you shine this light through the bottom half of the egg, you'll be able to see if it's been developed or not. The way you can tell if it's developed is that it's gonna be only see through the lower half of it, and that's gonna be the air bubble. The rest should be full or look kind of like red with veins in it. So what you wanna do with the ones that are completely clear that you can see straight through, you wanna discard those and close your incubator back up for another 7 days or so. And then on the 15th day, you want to up your humidity to 73%. And this period is called lockdown. So on your lockdown, you are basically not opening the incubator at all during this process. You are letting it be super humid, super warm, and within the next 4 or 5 days, you're gonna get your chicks. So typically, from my experience, because we incubated all our chicks, most of our chicks hatched on day 15 and 16. With quail eggs, it's kind of good that they're small because you can fit like a lot more into your incubator, which is good because there's only a 70% hatch rate for every viable dozen. Yeah, so once you have these little eggs hatch inside your incubator, you are going to want to have a brooder nearby that's already set up. Brooders are super easy to make, so I just wanted to mention also that below on the very bottom of this document that you guys have, there are a bunch of video links, like YouTube links, on how to make all this stuff and more information. So if there's anything I didn't cover, these other people will probably highlight them in their videos. So let me just show you the brooder, and you also are going to see 2 of our quails that are in there. Let me know if you guys could see it. So as you can see, this brooder was made out of a Rubbermaid. They're super easy to make. Can everybody see that okay?
Is that basically the brooder the box itself?
Yeah, so the brooder is the box itself. This is where you're going to keep your freshly hatched quail chicks.
And I know previously you mentioned about like humidity. How are you controlling that?
So with the humidity, we have a hydrometer and a thermometer inside of the incubator. And between those two, you're going to be monitoring those temperatures daily, sometimes multiple times a day, to make sure they're right. If your humidity is down, you want to add a little bit of water to the incubator at a time to get it to the right humidity. And then also there's settings on each, depending on what incubator you get, to raise the temperature levels as well. So the importance of the brooder is you still want to have these newly born chicks in really warm and humid environments. So as you can see, it's really easy to make your own. And like I said, I left a link on the bottom of the document for instructions on that.
Do you want to get a view of the top? Nope. Okay.
Not yet. So let's see. So inside of the brooder, you're going to want to put aspen shavings, either mulch or something kind of soft, because these are going to be chicks with really delicate feet and their skin's going to be really soft still. But they need something to kind of like grab onto with their feet so their feet can develop right. Because you want their feet to develop straight versus, you know, kind of weird because they're trying to like get grip of something. So that's an important of the aspen shavings. And also inside of there, you want to include water, of course, and you want to put marbles inside a really small water dish. We honestly use a mason jar lid, and we put marbles in it, and then we put water in that. And the purpose for the marbles is because they drown really easily, and also you really don't want your new chicks to get wet at all. Them getting wet can translate into them getting hypothermia easily, even with the temperature inside the brooder. So you want to keep a heat lamp over your brooder, and you want it to be about 95 degrees in there. So you can also put a thermometer in there as well. And you can get a little tiny napkin and throw some chicken starter on that. Chicken starter is just basically ground up chicken protein, but it also has extra vitamins in it for your baby chicks. Typically, you want to remove your chicks from the incubator 12 to 24 hours after they hatch. The purpose for this is because they're still absorbing the nutrients from their egg, and they're also still drying off and gaining a little bit of strength and becoming more alert. So 12 to 24 hours, you think, well, you know, is that okay? Are they going to be hungry? But they're still absorbing everything from the egg that they were just in, so they'll be fine. Anytime after 24 hours, you definitely want to take them out and put them in the brooder. And you want to be kind of fast about it if there's still eggs that haven't hatched, because you don't want the humidity to drop inside of the incubator very much. If it drops tremendously, if there are any eggs that haven't hatched, it'll kind of shrink wrap those eggs around the chicks, and they'll have a hard time hatching out of them, which could cause birth defects and all kinds of other crazy stuff. So moving on from the brooder, you're probably going to have them in there for about anywhere from 3 to 6 weeks. It really depends on if you have other chicks or not. If you do have other chicks in your coop, you do not want to put the babies with them until they're at least 6 weeks. If you don't, and it's pretty warm outside and it's not very cold, you can definitely put them into something outside and get them started into their full-time habitat that you're going to make for them. So there are a little bit of quill politics. They're kind of similar to chickens. So if any of you have chickens, you might know this too, but you need, for every male, 3 to 5 hens. And there will always be a lead hen. You'll know who she is because she's going to have a very distinct call. Your other hens probably won't even make any sounds really unless there's predators around. But the lead hen will always make a distinct call. She kind of will alert the group when anything's going on outside of the coop, or if anything's coming near the coop or anything going on, she's going to make a call. The reason for having 3 to 5 hens per every male is because the males mate a lot and they have a lot of energy towards their mating habits. And so you want to distribute that energy out into multiple hens. If you don't have enough hens, it could get pretty aggressive. And your hens that are in there might lose feathers behind their head, or they might be stressed out from being overmated. But you definitely want a male. You might think like, okay, well, why would I want a male if he's going to do that? Or what if I don't want babies? But you still want a male inside your covey because he's going to balance everything out. Typically what happens when you just have a bunch of female hens together is that they're all going to be fighting for this lead hen role, and they could hurt each other. They can definitely be a little aggressive to each other sometimes. And so you really want to create a balance inside of your coop to prevent these things. Roosters do make noise. So even though quail are known to be the more quiet poultry to raise in your yard, yeah, I wanted to just let you guys know, like, if you're interested in doing this, make sure that you have neighbors who aren't easily bothered by this, because they will crow early in the morning when light first comes out quite a bit, probably at least for like a half an hour on and off. So be prepared for that too. If you're easily annoyed by things like that, you might want to reconsider. Let me see. So you kind of want to monitor your quails too. If you notice that there's quails in there that are really aggressive and they're causing a lot of harm to your other quails, you might want to consider rehoming them, or if you eat meat, then you might want to consider processing them. And that's really hard. Like we still haven't done that. I have been vegetarian most of my life, so we just rehome ours, but it's something to consider if you eat meat. You want to generally pick quails that are really harmonious with each other, so that way there's a nice balance, because as I mentioned before, they could be pretty aggressive and you want to prevent a bloodbath. And also, if there's one bad quail, it could influence other quails to pick up on bad behavior. So the quail's diet is fairly easy. So you want about 20% of fruits and veggies, and those can include garden and kitchen scraps. So it's nice to have the quails as part of your like permaculture garden because they will help you with any kind of weeds and any kind of, like say you had an infestation of caterpillars and your lettuce is all full of bites and it's all gross. The quail won't discriminate towards this stuff, so they'll gladly eat it. Veggies and greens include black chia, dandelion, Swiss chard, spinach, leafy greens, ground carrots, peas, corn, sunflowers, nasturtiums, and comfrey. And fruits could include raspberries, currants, blackberries, huckleberries, manzanita berries, elderberries, and watermelon. And I'm sure that there's a lot of other things they could eat. But definitely if you do start raising quails and you're wanting to give them scraps, always make sure you reference a guide somewhere online of things they're not supposed to eat, because some things could be pretty poisonous to them. You also want to grind up these veggie things or chop them up or rip them up pretty small, so that way it's easier for them to eat. They're also going to need 10% of calcium in their diet. Calcium can include sand. Oyster shells is the best. If you do get oyster shells, you definitely want to break them down a little bit more, because like I said, it's easier for the quails to eat these things when they're broken down a little bit. You can also, if you are on a budget, use clean, broken down dried eggshells. So you could do chicken eggshells. You can also do quail eggshells. And then the most important thing in their diet is high protein. So you can do high protein crumbles. That's probably the easiest. It's super cheap to buy. It's like 50 pounds is like $15, and that'll last you 2 or more months depending on how many quails you have. And the purpose for this is the more protein they have in their diet, the healthier quail is going to be. And also it's going to promote better egg production. You can also incorporate game bird seed into their diets. I did leave some information on that. So maybe like 10% of that into their protein. If it's summertime, it requires a lot of energy for your quails to break this game bird seed down. So I kind of recommend not using it as much in the summer to prevent them from overheating, because you know we are in California, so as it is, you're gonna want to try to keep the quail pretty cool. If it's winter, however, you can use a higher percentage of this game bird seed, because that extra energy will help keep your birds warm. The game bird seed has stuff like wheat seeds and amaranth seeds. So yeah, Evan is going to take over a portion of their diet, because we are going over a little bit of vermicompost too, because it can also be used as their protein.
Okay, hi everybody. I'm Evan. Some of you know me. Some of you are new to me. I'm going to be talking a little bit about growing protein for your quail. So yeah, as Michelle mentioned, protein is really important to their diet. A high percentage of protein. So I'm going to talk about a few different ways you can get that protein. The first is black soldier flies. I don't know, and if anyone has any questions, you can just put in the chat or unmute yourself and ask. I don't know how many people are familiar with black soldier flies, but that's the type of protein, insect protein I have the most we have the most experience with, and the best way I know to grow a lot of protein in a small space for quail. Some people, I guess, also feed their quail red wrigglers, like Tahereh was talking about. And thanks again for your great presentation. You cleared up a lot of questions I've had about worm composting. We've also had worms for a long time, and I've been pretty lazy about doing research about how to do it properly. So thank you. Red wrigglers, though, produce protein much slower than black soldier flies. So maybe if you had a really big bin, you'd have enough excess worms to contribute a substantial amount of protein to your quail, but I don't think they'd probably be the best option, but they do make much better compost. So they're much better at that than black soldier flies are. Another option is pill bugs, grubs. So when you're just out in your yard and find pests on your vegetables or whatever, you can feed those to your quail as long as it's not something poisonous like a tomato hornworm. But yeah, anything that can fit in their mouths that you know is not poisonous, you can feed to them. You could also like harvest pill bugs and other bugs by watering the ground a bit. I mean, many of us have probably observed this. Water the ground, put a board down on some dirt, and pick it up, a few days later, and there'll be tons of pill bugs and worms and things under there to feed your quail. And then another option is mealworms. So mealworms are really commonly bred for fishing bait, and they're bred to feed to like reptiles and fish. I think fish probably too. And they're a great alternative to black soldier flies. Are seasonal. They're not around for about 4 months of the year during the cold part of the year, maybe like, I don't know, late November to maybe March sometime, maybe April. So mealworms are a good alternative in the winter, and also, you can feed them the rest of the year as well. They're easy to breed in a tub with just a shallow layer of like wheat bran and oatmeal with pieces of potato or carrot for moisture. And they turn a lighter color when they pupate, and then they emerge as, and they're kind of like a orangish worm, maybe yay big, about an inch, less than an inch long. They pupate and turn a lighter color. They eventually emerge as black beetles. And it's best to separate the pupae into a separate container, which you can have a small separate container inside the main bin where you're growing them, because the worms may eat the pupae, which can't move, or don't move. But I'm going to be talking mostly about black soldier flies because that's what I actually have. I think they're probably the best option for growing protein that I know of, and that's what I have the most experience with. So if you are not familiar with black soldier flies, you're probably wondering, like, what the heck are those? So black soldier flies are, oops. Oh, there we go. Okay. Yeah, there you go. So thanks for pulling up a picture. So yeah, you can see they're like a pretty big fly. They're maybe 3/4 of an inch or so. I think they kind of almost look like a wasp, more than a fly, although they have the big, if you look closely, they have the crazy fly, I don't know what you call that, a compound eye. And they're found through much of the warmer parts of the world. So in the US, they're found to about the 40 degrees north latitude, which I'm not exactly sure where that is, but maybe somewhere in Northern California. So in the northern part of the country, you don't necessarily see them. In the southern part of the US, they're around. They're kind of around everywhere. Well, most everywhere. I'll go into more detail on that. They start out as, so you see that the segmented larva. So they start out life as a larva that's kind of segmented, and it doesn't really have a visible kind of, I guess it sort of has a rear end and a front, but they're kind of hard to tell. And they grow up to be about a little bit shorter than the adult fly. And then they're like an amazing recycler of waste in nature. So they feed on rotting waste. They'll eat manures, they'll eat meat. So they'll eat like carcasses. And they're incredibly efficient at turning waste into protein because they can eat just about everything, and they grow insanely fast. So if you're used to worm composting, worms I found they do things very slowly. They breed fairly slowly. They move pretty slowly. Black soldier flies do everything very quickly. They're always writhing around, so it can inspire some sort of like horror movie type nightmares and people that are if you're squeamish about bugs, and actually I have some here. I might as well just show you the ones I have. Oh. Whoops, we just spilled some water all over the bed, and I spilled some soldier flies on the floor. But anyway, so check it out.
Sorry, guys.
You can see inside the cup as they try to crawl out. You can see they're fairly...
Those look terrifying.
Yeah, depending on how much you like bugs, they're pretty, they can be kind of gross to people. But I would say you get used to them pretty quickly. I now just grab like handfuls of them and just, you know.
Now we have
you get used to it.
Eat it.
Oh, it's on the computer. Oops. Yeah, so, yeah, you can see, yeah, maybe I exaggerate a little bit how long they are. They're like, so you can see, you get an idea of the scale. Oops. There we go. Can people see that? Hopefully. So yeah, they're like, yeah, maybe about a ½ inch long. This is them in the larvae in their like final stage. So I'll explain sort of how their life cycle works. I'm just gonna pick a few off the floor before they crawl under our bed and turn into flies.
Sorry, guys.
So yeah, so
we just dropped a bunch of flies, and I also dropped like a gallon of water on the floor right now. So a little exciting over here.
There we go. Well, I think I got them. Nope. Yeah, so they're really fun. I used to work in garden education, and they're really great for just like grossing out the kids. They're really fun for that because in a bin you will have just thousands and thousands of them just writhing around, looking creepy. So yeah, the way their life cycle works. So they hatch from an egg into a larva. They eat, you know, gross stuff or, you know, just waste for about 3 weeks, and then they crawl. It's an important part of their life cycle. When they're ready to pupate and turn into a fly, they crawl out of their food. So they want to get out of their food to somewhere dry to pupate and turn into a fly. So we take advantage of that in the way we keep them. So yeah, a fly emerges from the pupa, and the pupa they kind of just pupate and hang out in like leaf litter on the ground somewhere, and they'll also bury themselves into the dirt. So yeah, a fly emerges from the pupa. It mates and lays eggs. You know, the females lay eggs, and they only live for about a week, usually without eating much of anything, maybe a little bit of nectar, which is kind of strange for a fly, right? So that's really important. They don't carry any disease because they don't feed. They don't like put out saliva like the flies that can carry disease. So they don't. They won't land in your food. They won't really bother you. All they're really concerned with is breeding, laying eggs, and dying. So which is pretty cool. They're not a vector for disease at all. So you don't have to worry about that. Yeah, so a good soldier fly bin takes into account their life cycle in 2 ways. By harvesting the fly larvae as they try to crawl up out of their food to pupate. You can use that to your advantage. And by giving the adult flies access to the bin in order to lay their eggs. So it's different than worms. It can't be self-contained because the flies need to fly in there to lay their eggs. So yeah, so how exactly do you keep them? How do you set up a bin? So I'm cheap and very lazy. And there are tons of YouTube videos everywhere on the internet and information all over the internet for how to make a soldier fly bin. And some, if you're really handy, if you're into making your own, if you're into DIY construction, there are all sorts of plans for how to make a soldier fly bin. I use the absolute simplest method, which I have included a YouTube link to here. And then at the bottom of the page also is the same link. So yeah, the way I do my bin is it's just a big plastic tub, kind of like the brooder you saw, but taller, a little bit longer, quite a bit taller and wider, but opaque. Opaque is important. They don't like light, so it's best to have an opaque, sides you can't see through. So you need the bin, a power drill, a very narrow board. I use one maybe like 4 inches wide, and then it needs to be, I think, about 2 feet, but you could just kind of measure it based on what kind of bin you end up using. And then you need some bedding or substrate. So it's a bit like worms, but they're not going to be eating the bedding. So you specifically want bedding they won't eat. They don't really eat leaves so much, or coffee grounds, or like woody materials, So a shredded, fairly fine wood mulch can work. Coffee grounds, which you can get from coffee shops, or Starbucks always gives away their coffee grounds if you have one nearby. I mostly use like dry shredded leaves, and I've started to use sort of shredded mulch. You need some corrugated cardboard and some duct tape and a plastic bucket. So yeah, you basically just, I'll go through this quickly. You decide to make one, you can, the information is here in this document. Yeah, you drill holes in the bottom for drainage. You cut a hole in the bin for the board to go through, which is the ramp. So that's what the larvae will use to climb out of the bin when they're done eating and they're ready to turn into a pupa. They climb up the ramp and out and fall into your bucket. So yeah, so you cut a hole kind of just below your lid, your handles, in the short side of your bucket. You leave room for the ramp to go through, and then a little extra room so that the flies have room to fly into the bin. That's really important. Add maybe 6 inches or so. They like a fairly deep bedding of your bedding, whether it's the dried crop, and best to add it in dry because their food will really add tons of moisture. So dry shredded leaves, the shredded woody mulch, or the dried coffee grounds, 6 inches deep is good to start with. You put your board in, you stick it through the hole you cut, with one end going through that hole. And then you want to always keep the board at about 30 to 45 degree angle. So, because that's the angle they like for crawling up out of the bin. And then you cut that corrugated cardboard into pieces. Maybe I do squares about like yay big, and duct tape them to the sides of the bin towards the top, because that makes a good spot for the female fly to lay her eggs. And then you snap your lid on and you're done. If you decide to watch, if you're interested in this and you decide to watch the YouTube link I gave, I do things slightly differently than that guy's method. He says to leave the lid off kind of loosely in order to let moisture escape. And I found that I wasn't getting that good of a harvest into my bucket. And I missed a step. So where your board comes out of the bin, you want to have underneath the end of the board, you want to put your bucket, so that when the larvae crawl up, they fall into the bucket. And that's where you'll gather them from. Yeah, so in the YouTube video, he mentions leaving the lid off loose to let out moisture. I keep it on tight because I was finding that I wasn't getting a harvest, and I think they were just crawling out. When it gets even just a little bit moist, they can crawl out. And they're pretty good at crawling out, basically, is the bottom line. And I think they were also crawling out of the bucket. So what I do is, I keep the lid on tight with a weight on top to make sure they can't squeeze through the gap. And then I put a couple of inches of water in the bucket. I read that you can do this. And they can hang out in that water without drowning for days. So they're just there. For some reason, that makes it so they can't climb out. And so you can just go and harvest them when you're ready for them with a little aquarium net. So you're probably wondering also, it looks like going through the video really quick to visualize sort of how it's done. And yeah, so you can see he's doing this in like a sort of like a paint program or a design program. Yeah, so he's adding in bedding. So you see the layer of the bedding inside the bin. And I think that was probably adding the larvae. And then see there's the little kind of the hole that just fits the board through. And yeah, and then the bucket will go under the end of the board. And yeah, it's pretty simple. And then you just make sure you get that lid on there. Yeah.
And this is,
yep, sorry.
This is to be able to, I want to say, cultivate the black soldier flies for the quails to eat, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
so crazy.
Yeah, so you can raise them for quail to eat, or you can also do it. You can compost all the stuff you couldn't give to worms, so they'll eat. Well, I'll get to their diet, but they're great for that too. So they're a good complement to worms, and I'll explain why in a minute. So yeah, you guys are probably wondering, like, how do you start a colony? Where I used to live in Pomona, it was really easy. This is how I got into black soldier fly composting. I left a bucket of food waste on my porch for like a month. And when I opened it up, it was just this disgusting goo. And it was just, I like, mentally kind of freaked out a bit because it was just, the surface was just writhing with soldier flies. And I had no idea what they were, but I looked it up and found out what they were, and then was like, I've been fascinated since.
He showed this to me on one of our first dates, by the way.
And she didn't run screaming, so it worked out okay. Yeah, so that was in Pomona. There's an ambient population of soldier flies. So from then on, I would just, when I wanted to start a bin, at least in the worm season, I would just like throw out a bunch of food waste in like a big trash can so things couldn't get into it very easily, and they would show up. But where I live, only 8 miles away now in Walnut, there are, I tried that and it didn't work. It attracted lots of fruit flies, of house flies, and the soldier flies never came. So you can get them at reptile shops. So if you have any store that sells reptiles, which are not that common, but they're around, they should have them. I'd be happy to, anyone who wants to start a bin, I'd be happy to give you some to start. And then it can take a little while to build up the population. So at first, instead of feeding them to the quail, I just take the larvae and throw them out in the yard to hatch into flies to then come back and lay eggs for, probably the first, I don't know, a few hundred or something. Each fly can lay like hundreds of eggs at a time. So you'll have a big population really quickly, and it will be perpetuate itself, although it is seasonal, which I'll talk about. Yeah, so if you want to buy them from reptile stores, they're about $5 for 100, or I can just give you a bunch for, free. Yeah, so as far as feeding, they can eat nearly anything: veggie scraps, fruits, grains, meat, bones, dairy, and manures of all types. Human manure, which you got to be careful about disease. I haven't tried that yet, but they'll eat like chicken manure. But what I've found is, like, I used to feed them cat poop, and I used to feed them the like cat urine attached to like cornmeal. I used cornmeal cat litter, so it was something they could eat. But you will have tons of ammonia in your bin, and it'll stink really badly. They don't eat the ammonia, so the ammonia stays. So I wouldn't recommend that. And when I used a little quail poop in there, again, the ammonia scent just stayed forever. So it was really gross.
Don't do it.
But yeah, they grow best and the most efficiently on a diet of mostly veggie and fruit scraps. But you can feed them basically anything that goes bad in your fridge, or if you get food waste from some outside source, or I don't know, if you work at a restaurant or something, they can eat basically anything. Spoiled dairy, moldy bread. But yeah, no more than like 10 to 15% meat and bones. And it's best to cut things up a bit because they can have trouble getting into the skin of like a whole fruit. But you don't need to cut things up as much as say worms. It's not as crucial. They'll figure it out. We just feed ours whatever food waste we have. If it's leftover fast food from one of our roommates, so it's not necessarily always the healthiest diet, but it's like whatever we have basically goes to them because they need a lot of food. A bin our size, which I mentioned the dimensions above, can take at least, I think, a couple of pounds of food a day, something like that. The estimate I got was per square meter from a online source. Per square meter, they can feed 15 kilograms every 3 days. So that's about 10 pounds a day in a square meter.
Isn't that crazy?
If you do the math, a bin our size is, I don't know, like at least a few pounds a day, I think. Yeah, and so you'll get a feel for how much to feed them, but you don't have to wait until you can't, it's not like worms. You don't have to wait until you can't recognize the food. You can just, you can pretty much get away with just keep throwing what you have in there unless you have tons of stuff. And the more you throw in, the quicker they'll crawl out and
they'll try to pupate right away after that.
Yeah, when you feed a lot, they will leave. A lot of them will leave the bin quickly, and you can feed them to your quail. So yeah, it's a great way if you have a ton of food waste, and especially food waste that worms can't really eat. They're a good option. And then also just they produce a huge amount of protein very quickly. So I'm not sure how much we're getting a day, but
It's a nice
Um,
supplement for the quails. Like they've
yeah,
been laying a
pretty
lot
good.
more eggs since we've been giving them soldier flies.
Yeah, and as far as harvesting, so just check the bucket. If you use the water method like I do, check it every few days, because I guess eventually they will drown, I assume. I haven't seen them drown. They all revive when you take them out. But check it every few days, every day or every few days. Scoop out the larvae with like a little aquarium net, or you can grab them or use some kind of,
We just recently
yeah.
upgraded to like a vegetable strainer, like a fine mesh one.
Yeah. And then I dry them out in the sun so that they're not going to pick up all the dirt in the quail enclosure. I dry them out in the sun on top of a tarp, but you could probably rig up some kind of little screen thing to just put them in to let them drain and dry out. And then we throw them around the pen to encourage the quail to scratch for them. And then we also put, a good amount in like a little cup with some, short sides for the quail to pick at as they
Throughout the day.
Throughout the day, yeah. And then as far as maintenance, the bin can get really wet with them. They produce a lot of moisture, so I just keep mixing in dry substrate. And it's pretty good to let the substrate get deep. They do like to be, I guess optimally, they like to be like 7 or 8 inches down, I think. But when it gets really high, you can try harvesting your compost. I've never actually harvested any. I guess it's been for a short enough time that it didn't build up to a point where I really needed to. I just kind of let it build up and up and up. But you can harvest it. It will be kind of like look like half finished compost. If it's gotten really moist, it may be pretty stinky. But I've never tried this, but I've heard kind of like worm. It's similar to the worm method. You can feed the larvae on just one side of the bin for a while, and then harvest the compost from the opposite side. And supposedly you can give it to redworms to be broken down. In that case, you probably wouldn't want to use woody mulch as your substrate. You maybe want to use the coffee grounds or the leaves, which the worms can actually eat, as opposed to the woody mulch, which they probably won't be able to until it maybe breaks down very fine. But yeah, you can use that compost for the redworms, or add it to a compost pile, or on top of garden beds. And then a really important detail that I forgot to include in this, I guess, did I already mention it? The seasonality? I think I did. In case I didn't, soldier flies, since you need the ambient, you can't really bring them inside unless you, it's possible, but you have to figure out a way to kind of cage in the flies, let them hang out and mate and everything.
You don't want to do that.
So people do that in cold climates. They'll make like or in, there are even soldier fly factories in places like Ohio where it's all a closed system inside. For our purposes, I mean, it'd be pretty complicated to do that. But yeah, they're basically around from like April to November. And then in the winter, yeah, you could feed your quail like mealworms. Oh, but if you want to save your worms for the following spring, like save them in winter for the following spring, you save the pupae. So let the larvae that crawl off turn into pupae. So they'll stop moving basically and be kind of stiff. And then you can store those in a container in the fridge until spring, and then restart your colony that way. Yeah.
Yeah. So that is our soldier fly protein for the quail.
Does anyone have questions on soldier flies before we continue?
No.
Okay.
So in this PowerPoint, I also put what climates the quail could live in. So they could live in a fairly cold climate. The thing about it is it doesn't get too cold here in California. I mean, it can freeze over sometimes, but you can also put a extension cord, like a weatherproof extension cord, and put like a heat lamp inside your coop. But more importantly, in the winter, you definitely want to create some kind of barriers from the wind. So definitely like some shades or tarps that you can put and bungee on the side of your coop would be really helpful. In the summer, this is why you kind of want to strategically put your coop in maybe a shaded area or something that's not too hot. Because in the summer, 117 is like pushing it for the quails. But if you have them in the shade, they can probably still be in that climate and not be as hot. Cleaning the coop is pretty important. So like I said, you could do different things for the substrate for the coop. You can do aspen shavings, you can do sand. We just recently adopted the deep litter method, so there's a section of that underneath this. But the most important thing is you want to keep it clean. You don't want a bunch of feces everywhere because this will jeopardize the integrity of your quail's feet. And you definitely don't want them to get any kind of boils on their feet because that could cause staph infection and kill them. And also just, having a dirty coop could attract mites and fleas and other things that suck their blood that are really bad for your quail. I mentioned the deep litter method. That's fairly new to us. We're still learning about that. But basically, it's where you top a bunch of mulch, like a few inches of mulch into your coop. And then they're going to poop on it and they're going to scratch in it. And it's going to attract pill bugs and other things. You can throw some of your soldier flies in there if you decide to do that. And within the next couple of weeks, or sometimes people do it every couple months, the quails are going to be breaking down that, as well as the mulch is going to be breaking down on its own. And then what you could do is you could take that out and you'll have like stuff ready for your garden beds. Or you can top it off and continue to compost. It's really important to have some kind of dust bath inside of your setup for your quails. So what you could do is get bricks and make a little square so it's like about that deep, and you can fill it with sand, and then you could do that diatomaceous earth inside of that will help prevent mites on your quails. But it's really important that they are able to dust bathe at least once a week to prevent any kind of pests or parasites onto them. So we're almost towards the end of our presentation. So is it beneficial or sustainable to have quail? I would say so, especially if you're into growing your own food and gardening. They're mostly quiet. They supply compost for your garden. They eat your scraps and weeds. They really like to eat weeds that grow around the yard, so that's a plus, right? They're pretty inexpensive. Like I said, a 50-pound bag of their food, plus incorporating your garden scraps, and if you do any kind of vermicompost. We typically pay like $15 every other month to feed them, which is insanely cheap considering that they're going to give us eggs. The hens are going to lay eggs for you whether you have males in there or not. So I did want to go over the eggs because there are so many benefits to them, and I did want to show you the eggs too. So we have about 12 hens in our coop right now. I forgot to mention this, but you can have multiple coveys inside of your coop if it's big enough. You need about a square foot per hen or per quail. So if it's big enough, you can have more than one covey, which is 3 to 5 females to every male. So here are the eggs. This is from the 12 hens that we have right now, and this is only 4 or 5 days worth. So you're thinking like, oh my god, that's a lot of eggs, but let me show you how small they are. So it's going to take at least 3 of these eggs to equal a chicken egg, which is why you want probably more hens. If you and your family eat a lot of eggs, you're going to want more hens to produce an adequate amount to feed you guys.
And they taste richer and better than chicken eggs, in my opinion.
Yeah. So some of the benefits of the eggs. So like I said, they lay an egg a day. 3 to 4 of them equal a chicken egg. And they're considered a superfood. And the reason why they're considered a superfood is because they have so many more health benefits to them than a chicken egg. They contain 10% of your daily vitamin B, B12, higher protein and less cholesterol than a chicken egg. So if you have any issues with cholesterol, you probably want to consider quail eggs. They contain amino acids. They help build collagen. They're high in iron, which help promote red blood cell count in the body. They contain selenium, lecithin, and vitamin D, which is good for detoxing the liver. They promote brain health and brain function. They help boost the immune system. And also, plus, they're a natural aphrodisiac. So, yeah, there's that too. Overall, they're just super good for you. I did want to mention that the quails, another reason why it's good to have them is because they grow really fast. So like you incubate them, 6 weeks later, they're an adult, they're laying eggs and they're breeding already. So I wanted to show you what an adult quail looks like. If she lets me get her.
Is that brown fat? Oh, sorry. I defamed her.
So this is our little quail. This is an adult. She's a female.
She's posing very
She's a
calmly.
female. She's very docile. So as you can see, like I said, if you are very selective with your hens and your quails that are in your coop, you'll have some really good pets too. So she is always she's the nosiest one. She always comes up to us when we're opening the quail coop. Sometimes she'll slip away and get out of the coop, but she doesn't fly away. She just wants to be by us. But yeah, as you can see, they're pretty small. They're not very big. She's so funny looking. Yes, very, very cute. Very sweet. Can kiss her and hold her and hug her, and she just doesn't care. I can hang out with her, take her around the yard with me. She's fine.
They're not all that calm.
They're not all that way. And you're going to see that right now with one of the babies that's 3 weeks old.
Ready?
So I did want to mention the babies, when they first hatch, they're the size of a quarter. They're really small. So in 3 weeks from that point, they're going to be about this big. This is our 3-week-old. I think it's a hen. Some of them are sexable by the colors of their. See, some of them are crazy. So it's okay. It's okay. You gotta kind of tame them and spend time with them to get them as docile as the other one. But let me show you the size difference.
That was a nice catch, by the way, Evan.
Yeah.
Thanks. Give you guys a close up.
Okay.
Just calm down a little.
So here's right now 3 weeks, 10 weeks. But 10 weeks is still basically the same size as 6 weeks because they don't grow after 6 weeks.
And they're best friends.
And one day is like that small.
These are probably like the only quails ever on Zoom. I'm just
Maybe.
right here live.
So if you guys have any questions, let me know. I did want to throw it out there that, like the soldier flies, we like to share plants and we like to share soldier flies and anything else that we have in abundance. And we would love to share quail eggs with you to eat, to try them to see how they taste, or to incubate, because we do have fertile eggs. And also, if you don't have access to incubator, but you want quails, we can also incubate some for you. So just let us know. We want to try to partner with somebody in the group that's really handy who can build coops for people. We would love to sponsor families and give them quails and a quail setup if they are interested in raising quails for quail eggs or food. We have more than one variety of quail because I got really into it the last few months. I started collecting Coturnix quail varieties. So we also have the really rare Celadon, like really pretty blue quail eggs. And those are still Coturnix quail, but they lay these really pretty eggs. So yeah, just let us know. You have our email in the group, and also you have this document to reference. If you use the link that I gave you from Google, if I missed anything, I'll add more stuff to that document as time goes on. And also, don't forget to check out those links on the bottom of that document as well. Those are really helpful.
Oh, do they have our contact information?
Let me leave my contact information here. This is my personal email. I will probably, let me see if I spelled that right now.
You put mine in there too.
And you can also contact Evan. We're definitely going to try to make it out to some of the events going on to plant people's yards up in the weeks to come. So you guys will have the opportunity to meet us in person if you haven't already. And hit us up if you have any more questions. I know if it was a lot of information and I might have been talking fast too at first. So if you missed anything or something wasn't clear, just send us an email.
It's all recorded too, so I'll be sure to upload everything tonight, hopefully, with the Google Docs and everything in the description so people can click when they're looking at it on YouTube.
Great. Oh yeah, and we live in Tahereh. You were wondering where we live. We live in Walnut, so like the east end of the San Gabriel Valley. So if you're in Pasadena, like what, 25 minutes maybe?
Yeah, give or take. Don't go during rush hour.
Honestly, though, we're always
20
out
miles,
there.
maybe.
There's, we're always traveling around LA. So, we can also ship eggs. So if you want to try incubating eggs out there, they ship well.
And if you're in Oakland, I don't know if it's.
We can ship eggs to you.
Yeah, my sister lives in Oakland, so we go up there once in a while. So
we do go up
I don't
there
know
too.
if it might work out that we could bring you something at some point. I mean.
Yeah, and like I said, I want to partner with anybody in the group who's good at building stuff, because it's so easy to build a coop in a run, and to be able to help out anybody who wants to raise the quail for quail eggs or food, that'd be awesome. I could sell the eggs, but to you guys, I'm willing to just give them to you. Because we have a lot of them, as you can see. That was only 4 or 5 days worth. You know what? Sometimes I do sell these little eggs when I need to get stuff for the garden. I'll sell these on OfferUp once in a while because the blue eggs are worth a lot of money. So they're very, very profitable. A dozen of these eggs cost about $60 because of how rare they are. So, and like I said, I want to give these to you guys for free. So just let me know.
What do you think of the taste, Michelle?
The taste is really creamy. I don't know how.
It's got a richness to it.
It's very rich. It's not.
It tastes like a concentrated chicken egg. I feel it's not that different, but yeah, like concentrated flavor, I would say, and it tastes, I don't know, richer somehow. But I don't know. My sister tasted them and she's like, these taste the same. So maybe not everyone will agree. I think they taste quite a bit better.
Yeah, kids really like them because they're small. Kids love things that are mini sized. So it encourages them to eat the eggs too. Evan's mom is really skilled at cooking the eggs, she made us these like a whole platter of really tiny deviled quail eggs.
And yeah, Jordan, I remember your building skills from when you did aquaponics at Cal Poly. So awesome.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they're definitely good for if you want your kids to practice cooking with you or get into cooking or get into nutrition. They're definitely something to incorporate into that.
Taste, how could you describe them in regards to, like, I guess, conventional eggs that we normally buy at a store? What's the difference, or what do you notice?
I don't know. It's really hard to explain it.
Yeah, I just feel like more concentrated flavor. But
I
yeah, it's
Yeah.
not
I
like
don't think it tastes more eggy. I don't know. So
More
concentrated,
eggy.
I
yeah,
don't
so
think
maybe
is
that
the right
that
word.
doesn't sound necessarily
Um,
pleasant.
Just
but,
like a really
they're
delicious,
good.
fresh, like creamy egg. Because I feel like the egg to white ratio, the egg yolks in the quail eggs are a little bit bigger to the white ratio. So I think that's why they taste more rich.
And yeah, I mean, yeah.
Oh, they sometimes put them in like pho.
Mhm.
Yeah, and they kind of like when you squish the egg in the pho, like, I don't know, you definitely feel that, even though it's so small, you feel the taste really prominent.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
if you're curious, like we could get you some eggs, or yeah, they're pretty easy to find in, like, I don't know, the Japanese market near us in West Covina sells them,
the
but they're
Japanese
not that hard to
market will
find.
have the
So
pharaoh. So it's a type of Coturnix quail. It's called a pharaoh. It's just like a commonly brown colored one, and these are the ones that are typically in those 12 packs that they give you. Or no, they're like an 8-pack at the Japanese market, and it's probably like $2 or so for that pack. Yeah, if you get a variety of your quails, you can have like rainbow eggs too. As you can see, these are all different colors and patterns, and it's pretty cool.
That's awesome. I'd be curious to see how people would do an Easter egg hunt with those little eggs.
Oh my gosh, I know.
pretty hard
That's
to
like
find.
it's the ultimate. It's like trying to find Waldo in like a candy cane wonderland or something. Do you guys have any more questions? Thanks, Jordan, by the way.
Yeah, thank you.
So yeah, if you guys can think of any families that are in need and want another food source and have the time and to raise quail, just let us know.
What I had a question, like, could you, like, what is the difference when native quails, like ones that are like the California quail?
I mean,
we'll be able to raise them just the same, or any
I don't
difference?
think so. I think
no,
these are like a domestic quail.
Yeah.
Are there other species of domestic quail besides the Coturnix?
So the California quail, obviously they have very distinct differences in the way they look. They have that little plume that curves. And I don't think you could eat their eggs. And their eggs are much smaller too. But there are other domesticated quails that you could raise. I think the other one is called a button quail, and they look very similar to these ones that we have. But their temperament is a lot different. They're really skittish. You probably can't tame them the way we have these ones tamed. And also their eggs are a lot smaller. So I don't even know how many button quail eggs you would need to equal one chicken egg. It might be like more work than it's worth.
Are those the ones they raise for hunting?
I don't know. No, I think those are Bob Whites.
Oh, okay.
Bob Whites. Yeah, there's a lot of different quails, so you can check them out on, just type in like domesticated quail on Google to see the different ones. But I know specifically the Coturnix quail have been domesticated for hundreds of years. Like they don't even That's another thing. The reason why you need to incubate their eggs is because they evolved in a way where they don't have the natural instinct to really brood their eggs themselves, or to sit on them, to lay them. Once in a while, you might be able to get away with, you might be, get lucky to get a quail that wants to do that, but it's very rare. Also, I know specifically that these Coturnix quails are much bigger than other quails, so I think that's why they're preferred for people who do process them and eat them as meat, a meat source as well, or a protein source. And like I said, their eggs are a lot bigger than the other quails as well.
Awesome. I know it's gonna be about 9 o'clock, so if anyone needs to leave, that's fine. We won't take it personal. I think most of us actually know each other in person, so now we're just talking like homies. So, what's it called? I noticed you in the presentation, talking about the protein source. We even brought up like the idea of like us eating the bugs. But there's a lot of overlapping, and I was wondering if maybe there's ways to integrate both systems, like a vermicomposting and the black soldier flies and the quail. Like, how would an integrated system all look like? I don't know, just throwing an idea out there, because there was definitely connections I was picking up on.
Yeah, definitely. I know. I mean, I've heard of people like setting up a worm bin right under a rabbit hutch. I think the quail poop would probably be too hot for them. A rabbit poop is kind of perfect.
Yeah.
But yeah, as far as like actually having them connected, the system's sort of physically connected. But yeah, like I know I've never tried it, but I've heard that you can take your soldier fly compost and give it to the worms, and they will break it down into worm castings are a much more usable compost than what the soldier flies produce. So I've never tried that, but people say it. Yeah. Sorry. Oh, I think you're.
Okay. So I was going to say, I didn't mention this earlier, but worms can also actually eat meat and, bones and chicken bones and
Oh, okay.
protein. But that protein has to be really, really crushed small.
Oh,
And then
okay.
if you feed the protein to the worms, then you have actually a very balanced casting, because it has a lot of protein in it as well. It has not just all the minerals in it, which comes from the fruit and the vegetables, but also the protein that will come from minerals. So there has to be a way to maybe combine these two things, because this is protein rich and then that's mineral rich and all, vitamin rich. So yeah, but to add crushed chicken bones and meat, which has to be chopped really, really small and dried out a little bit, kind of like feeding them jerky, but shredded to small, needs a few more steps and more precision to keep the critters out of the space. And then you'll end up with probably a whole lot more maggots, which is fine, because then you can feed them to the quails.
Yeah, I mean, the quantities of food that worms need seem to be, quite a bit smaller.
Yeah.
So I mean, they only need a small protein supplement.
Yeah.
I would think this two systems could still complement each other well, especially because the worms can eat. Oh, and I guess. I don't know how much protein ends up in the compost that the black soldier flies produce,
Oh.
or if it's just in their bodies. I don't know if it's all integrated into them or some is left in I don't really know. So that'd be interesting to know, because then if you feed that to the worms, they're getting the protein from the compost.
Right.
I don't know.
Just like adding the crushed eggshells, they're getting all the calcium and the phosphorus.
Yeah.
From those eggshells.
I didn't know that about worms, because oftentimes when you read about worms, they say, "Oh, don't give them dairy, don't give them meat." You know what I mean?
Yeah.
They commonly say that when you read about worms,
well, they say that because you're talking to a general public, and then you don't want to get into trouble, because if people are not really following directions very carefully, and diligently and aren't crazy about these things, then you got all these things happening, flies and bugs and maggots and whatnots, and then next thing you know, you're just throwing it all away and saying, this was rubbish. But um, but if you are into it, like all of us are, then yes, you basically everything gets decomposed, even everything, even to the worms. You could actually give them your leftover food from whatever, you take out or whatever that you haven't eaten. You can, but it has to be crushed a whole lot and also dried out a whole lot. All that moisture is not good in a worm bin.
Okay.
So
Mm.
yeah, well, it's worth an experiment. I haven't done it myself
Yeah.
because I haven't, but it's worth doing. Maybe I should do it, and then next talk I can tell you what happened.
Okay, yeah, and we have worms too, and it's a sealed bin, so we could try putting some meat in there and see what happens.
Yeah, mine is a closed bin as well.
Yeah, I mean, shouldn't be a problem with vermin.
Yeah. Anyway, I mean, next thing then I guess one needs to test these things in a lab and really see what's the mineral or whatever the content is of
Yeah, and there's I haven't looked at a lot of it, but there's a lot of scientific research, and I'm sure there's on worms as well, but there's a lot of scientific research on soldier flies. A lot of different, so that information is probably available.
Probably, yeah.
For the soldier flies at least, and I'm sure it is for worms.
Yeah, I'm sure it is, because
Somewhere.
people are doing it on a commercial scale.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, thank you, Joe and Teresa and everybody else. I sign off and see you next week with something interesting. I'm sure something fun and interesting.
Thank you, Tahereh.
Just wanted to let folks know too, we also have that compost support group. So if you want to be added, just direct message us on Instagram, or that's where we have our support group at. If you want to be included, I don't know. Right now we've just been kind of brainstorming ideas, topics, and all that. So this has been really interesting. Just the whole idea of like understanding, the birds' life, the bugs' life, the soil life, the life, all life. Seeing how we create ways within our own spaces to help become better caretakers of the land. So I'm really enjoying these talks.
Yep.
Bringing us all together, you guys.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, thank you so much. Michelle, Evan, Tahereh, learned so much. And thank you to everyone for joining us.
Yeah. Thank you, Clem. Thank you, Carlos, Rita, Joe, Ajiana. And I guess that's it. Some of us are going to meet up tomorrow to do some gardening work and whatever. There's a few projects we have in Alhambra. If you all are interested, we have a terracing project going on in Alhambra. Maybe Sunday we're going to go check it out. And then we're starting a little nursery in El Sereno, kind of by the lot where we were at in El Sereno, Altsumna. But if y'all interested this weekend meeting up, that will be Sunday. So just go ahead and hit us up.
Okay, we'll do.
Great.
Awesome. All right. Well, good night, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for coming.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.